4 years. Seraphine pressed her back against the cold stone of the corridor and counted them silently. 4 winters, 4 springs, 4 harvests where she had watched Kael Draven, Alpha King of Arendor, walk past her as though she were no more significant than the torchlight flickering on the walls. But she had not always been invisible to him. She closed her eyes, and the memory surfaced unbidden. The night in the Thornwood, 2 years before the silence began. The northern wars had been raging for months, and Kael had returned to Ashenmere for 3 days of council before riding back to the front. He had found her in the herb stores after midnight, drawn by the scent of dried lavender and something deeper, something neither of them could name. His hands tangled in her hair, his breath ragged against her throat. The impossible tenderness in his voice when he whispered her name like it was the only word that mattered. And then the bite. Not a casual mark, not a reckless impulse, a claiming bite, pressed into the curve of her neck with deliberate, trembling reverence. "You are mine," he had said, his golden eyes burning in the darkness. "When the wars are settled and the northern clans are brought to heel, I will declare you before the kingdom. You will stand beside me, Seraphine. I swear it on my blood." She had believed every word. For the remaining 2 years of the war, he had come to her whenever he could. Stolen hours between campaigns, messages smuggled through trusted couriers. The bond between them had hummed like a living wire, growing stronger with each meeting, each whispered conversation, each night spent in each other's arms as though the world outside did not exist. She had been happy, terrified, uncertain, but happy. Then the wars ended. The northern clans knelt, and Kael changed. It did not happen all at once. That was the cruelest part. There was no dramatic moment of rejection, no single conversation where he told her it was over. Instead, there was a slow, suffocating fade. The visits became shorter, the warmth behind his eyes dimmed by degrees, like a lantern running out of oil. He would come to her chamber, sit for 10 minutes speaking of nothing in particular, and leave without touching her. Then the visits became monthly, then quarterly, then they stopped entirely. The man who had once crossed an entire castle to steal 10 minutes with her began to look through her as if the walls behind her were more interesting than her face. At first, Seraphine had made excuses, the pressures of ruling, the demands of reconstruction, the endless parade of ambassadors and counselors who consumed his every waking hour. She told herself that patience was a virtue, that a king's promises moved on a different timeline than an ordinary woman's heart. But patience has a shelf life, and 4 years had rotted hers to dust. Now she stood in the servants' passage outside the great hall of Ashenmere, listening to the sounds of celebration bleeding through the ancient oak doors. Tonight was the Conquered Feast, the annual gathering where every noble house in Arendor renewed its oath of loyalty to the crown. And tonight, according to the whispers racing through the castle like wildfire, Kael was expected to announce his formal consort. Not her. The name on every tongue was Helene Corsevin, daughter of Lord Corsevin, whose armies controlled the mineral-rich western reaches and whose political influence had been tightening around the throne like a silk noose for years. Helene was everything Seraphine was not. Highborn, politically valuable, trained from childhood in the art of courtly manipulation. She had arrived at Ashenmere 3 months ago with 12 wagons of gifts and a smile that never reached her ice-blue eyes. Seraphine's hand drifted to the mark on her neck. She kept it hidden beneath high collars and scarves, had done so for years. No one knew it existed except her and the king who had put it there. A king who apparently could not even remember doing so. Her other hand lay flat against her stomach, where a different truth resided. 6 weeks. She had confirmed it with the healers in the lower village, women who did not ask questions and did not keep records. 6 weeks since the last time Kael had come to her. A visit so brief and mechanical that she had cried afterward, alone in the dark. wondering if she had imagined the man who once held her like she was sacred. He did not know about the child. And standing here now, listening to the court prepare to celebrate his union with another woman, Seraphine realized he never would. The doors of the great hall swung open, and light spilled into the corridor. A servant girl nearly collided with her, carrying an empty wine pitcher. "Mistress Seraphine, you should be inside. The king is about to speak." "I know," Seraphine said quietly. "That is exactly why I am out here." But her feet betrayed her. Against every rational thought screaming in her skull, she moved toward the doors. She needed to see it. Needed to watch the final nail driven into the coffin of every promise he had ever made. Because without seeing it, some foolish, stubborn part of her heart would keep whispering that maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, he would remember what she meant to him. She slipped through the side entrance and tucked herself into the shadow of a marble column. The great hall of Ashenmere blazed with 1,000 candles. Long banquet tables stretched the length of the room, laden with roasted game and honeyed wine. The noble houses sat in ranked order: Corsivan, Ashwick, Palarin, Dunmare, their banners hanging from iron beams above. And at the head of it all, elevated on a dais carved from black granite, stood Cale Draven, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell in careless waves above sharp cheekbones and a jaw that could have been cut from the same granite beneath his boots. His ceremonial armor, black leather and silver wolf clasps, fit him like a second skin. Power radiated from him in waves that made lesser wolves lower their eyes instinctively. Seraphine did not lower hers. She had stopped bowing to him in her heart long before tonight. "My lords and ladies of Arendor," Cale's voice rolled across the hall like distant thunder. The conversations died instantly. Even the candle flames seemed to still. "For 6 years, this kingdom has bled. We have buried our dead, rebuilt our walls, and forged peace from the wreckage of war. Tonight, we celebrate not merely survival, but the future we have earned." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Goblets were raised. Seraphine's nails dug into her palms. A future that requires strength, unity, and alliances that will ensure Arendor never again stands vulnerable to its enemies. Seraphine watched Helene Corsivan rise from her seat at the table nearest the dais. She moved with practiced grace, her silver gown catching the candlelight, her expression arranged in perfect, modest anticipation. Every step was choreographed, every detail calculated. Lord Corsivan sat beside his daughter's empty chair, his weathered face carved into barely concealed triumph. 3 months of maneuvering, 3 months of private meetings with the King's Council, 3 months of positioning his daughter in Cale's path at every opportunity. Seraphine had watched it all from the margins, the way you watch a storm approach from across a valley, knowing it will destroy everything, powerless to stop it. "I have consulted with my council," Cale said. His voice was steady, measured, carrying the weight of rehearsed certainty. "I have weighed the needs of this kingdom against every other consideration." His eyes swept the hall. For one fraction of a heartbeat, his gaze passed over the column where Seraphine stood hidden. It did not pause, did not flicker, did not register her existence in any way. 4 years of being invisible, and still that moment cut deeper than any blade. "Tonight, I am honored to announce that Lady Helene Corsivan has accepted the position of Royal Consort of Arendor." The hall erupted. Applause thundered from the noble tables. Warriors stamped their boots against the stone floor. Lord Corsivan rose to embrace his daughter as she ascended the dais steps, her silver gown trailing behind her. Cale extended his hand. Helene took it. And Seraphine watched the man who had bitten a forever promise into her skin press his lips to another woman's knuckles, as though the word mate had never left his mouth. She waited for him to hesitate, for his wolf to resist, to recognize the wrongness of what he was doing. For the bond between them, the bond she still felt like a living wire beneath her ribs, to yank him back from the edge of this betrayal. Nothing. His face was composed, calm, certain. He looked at Helene with the polite regard of a man completing a transaction, and it was somehow worse than if he had looked at her with love. Love could be fought. Indifference could not. The claiming mark on Seraphine's neck began to burn, not the warm pulse she felt when he was near. This was different. Sharp. Angry. As though the bond itself was screaming in protest at what it was being forced to witness. She stifled a gasp. On the dais, Cale stiffened. His head turned slightly, almost imperceptibly, in her direction. For one electric second, she thought his nostrils flared, scenting something, searching for something. Then Helene placed her hand on his arm and he looked away. "Let us feast," he declared, "to the future of Arendor." The last thread of hope Seraphine had been clutching for 4 years snapped cleanly in her chest. She turned her back on the great hall of Ashenmere and walked away from Cale Draven for the last time. She did not see his hand rise to his own neck, pressing against a spot that mirrored exactly where his mark sat on hers. She did not see the flash of confusion that crossed his face before Helene's laughter pulled his attention back. And she did not hear the low, involuntary growl that rumbled in his chest, a sound that made 3 wolves nearest the dais take an uneasy step backward. Seraphine packed by moonlight. Her chamber in the lower castle was small, a healer's quarters, functional and sparse. All those years in Ashenmere and everything she owned fit into a single leather satchel. A few dresses, a pouch of dried herbs, her mother's silver ring, a bundle of letters she had written to Cale and never sent, tied with a leather cord. She held the letters over the candle flame, watched the edges curl and blacken. Then she pulled them back, unable to destroy them. Foolish. Even now, some part of her could not burn the evidence that she had once been loved. The servants' gate was unguarded. Every available hand was serving the feast or celebrating in the kitchens. She had spent years learning the invisible pathways of this castle, the routes that no one watched because no one important used them. Tonight, that invisibility would serve her one final time. The night air hit her like a slap. Winter had not released its grip on Arendor, and frost clung to the cobblestones. She paused at the outer wall, looking back at Ashenmere one last time. The castle blazed with light and noise, music and laughter spilling from every window. "I waited for you," Seraphine said to the castle walls. "For 4 years I waited, and you never came." She turned north. The mountain road to Cale Moran was treacherous in winter, but it led to the outer provinces, places where the Alpha King's name was a distant rumor rather than a daily reality. Places where a healer with no surname could disappear completely. Her hand found her stomach. The child was barely more than a thought, a cluster of cells that had not yet learned to kick or dream. But it was real, and it was hers. "I will give you everything he never gave me," she said to the darkness. "I will never make you wait for love that is not coming." The ancient pines of the Thornwood, the same forest where Cale had once claimed her beneath a canopy of stars, closed behind her like a door shutting on a finished chapter. But in the hours before dawn, Cale Draven woke from a dead sleep, with his hand clutching his throat and a name on his lips he had not spoken in months. Seraphine. His mark, the one that mirrored hers, hidden beneath his collar where no advisor had ever seen it, burned with sudden vicious heat. He sat up in darkness, chest heaving, his wolf clawing at his consciousness with a desperation that made no sense. Something was wrong. Something was missing. But by the time the feeling crystallized into action and a frantic order was given to summon the healer from the lower quarters, the answer came back hollow and final. She was gone, and no one could tell him where. 2.5 years later, The village of Brindhollow had almost forgotten it had a newcomer. Seraphine had arrived in the dead of winter. A young widow, she claimed, seeking refuge from grief. The village elders took pity on her swollen belly and haunted eyes, offering her the abandoned cottage at the edge of the pine woods in exchange for her healing skills. She accepted without hesitation. Now she was simply Rena the healer. She delivered babies. She set broken bones. She brewed teas for coughs and poultices for wounds. And every night she lay awake with her hands on her belly, then later on the small warm body beside her, feeling the pulse of a life she had made alone. She had given birth on the coldest night of the year, with no one beside her except Gretya, the village midwife, a stout woman with hands like shovels and a voice like warm bread. The labor was long. There was a terrible, suspended moment when the baby did not cry, and Seraphine's world narrowed to a single pinpoint of absolute terror. Then the cry came, thin and furious and perfect. A boy. Small but fierce, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into a color Seraphine recognized with an ache so deep it lived in her marrow. She named him Corvin, after no one. A name with no history, no lineage, no connection to the world she had left behind. He grew the way mountain children do, quickly, stubbornly, and with a wildness that no amount of gentle parenting could fully contain. He had a laugh like bells struck with a hammer and a temper that could curdle milk. And he had his father's eyes, that impossible amber, flecked with gold when sunlight caught them. Seraphine saw Kale in her son every single day, and every single day she swallowed the ache and kept moving. But the mark on her neck had never faded. She examined it sometimes, late at night after Corvin had fallen asleep. Among wolf-kind, an abandoned claim dissolved within months. The mark would pale, flatten, and vanish, as if it had never existed. Seraphine's had done the opposite. It had darkened, deepened. The edges had grown more defined, as though the bond was strengthening despite the distance. Some nights it pulsed with heat that woke her from sleep. Other nights it ached with a hollow pulling sensation, like something far away was reaching for her. And then there were the dreams. They had started months after she arrived and had not stopped since. Always the same shape, though the details shifted. She was standing in a dark room. A presence circled her, massive, restless, radiating heat. She could not see it, but she could feel it searching, tearing through the darkness with frantic, methodical intensity. And always, just before she woke, a voice, low and raw and wrecked. "Where are you?" Seraphine would wake with tears on her cheeks and the mark burning. She would lie in the darkness, listening to Corvin's soft breathing. "Nowhere you will find me," she would say back. But the dreams never stopped, and the mark never faded. The traders came to Brindhollow every 3 months, when the mountain road was passable. Seraphine usually avoided them. Traders carried stories, and stories carried names, and names carried the risk of recognition. But Corvin had developed a cough that rattled in his small chest, and she needed colt's foot root that did not grow at this altitude. So she wrapped him in his warmest blanket, settled him on her hip, and walked to the village square. She was counting coins at the trader's wagon when the conversation at the neighboring stall caught her attention. "Say he has gone completely feral," a young scribe was telling 2 village men. "The Alpha King of Arendor lost his mind entirely." Seraphine's hand froze over her coin pouch. "The consort," he announced, "the Corsivan woman. He never completed the union. Refused to touch her. She has been living in the East Wing like a ghost while he tears the kingdom apart searching for someone. A woman, though no one knows who. 60,000 gold pieces for her location. 60,000. That was not a reward. That was a ransom. The annual tax revenue of a mid-sized province, offered for a single woman's whereabouts. And the kingdom? His beta holds things together barely. Harvests are failing, wolves growing restless, feral attacks on livestock, border skirmishes. They say the land itself sickens because the alpha's bond is severed. Some say he does not sleep, that his wolf has nearly consumed him, that he shifts without warning and runs through the forests for days, howling for something no one can name. Seraphine completed her transaction with wooden fingers and walked back toward her cottage with measured steps. She did not run. Running attracted attention. But the moment her door closed behind her, she sank to the floor with Corvin clutched against her chest. He was searching for her. 2.5 years later, and he was still searching. The king who had ignored her for 4 years was now offering a fortune that could rebuild a city for any scrap of information about where she had gone. Why? The mark on her neck flared with violent heat, and for one disorienting second, she felt something through it. Not just warmth, but emotion. Raw, unfiltered, and so intense it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Anguish. Absolute, annihilating anguish. Then it was gone, and she was sitting on her kitchen floor with a coughing toddler and a heart that could not decide whether it was breaking or mending. He ignored you, she told herself, rocking Corvin gently. For 4 years, he looked through you like glass. Whatever he is feeling now does not erase what he did. But the dreams that night were worse than ever. The presence in the darkness was closer now, almost close enough to touch. And the voice that called through the void was no longer just desperate, it was dying. 3 days after the traders left, Seraphine woke to find wolf tracks in the snow outside her cottage. Not ordinary wolves. These prints were too large, too deliberately spaced in a perimeter around her home. Shifted wolves, scouts. She spent the morning in controlled terror, grinding herbs she did not need. By noon, the knock came. She opened the door with a skinning knife hidden behind her back and found a woman standing on her threshold. Tall, lean, close-cropped silver hair, a face assembled from angles rather than curves. A long scar traced her jaw from ear to chin. But her amber eyes held something Seraphine had not expected. Relief. My name is Thessaly. I am the King's Fang, his chief tracker and intelligence officer. I have been searching for you for 19 months. My name is Rena. I am a healer. You have the wrong person. You are Seraphine, formerly of the herb stores at Ashenmere Castle. You bear the king's claiming mark on your neck. And unless I am mistaken, the child behind you has his father's eyes. Corvin chose that precise moment to look up from his wooden animals and stare at Thessaly with wide, unmistakable amber eyes. Seraphine's grip tightened on the knife. If you have come to take me back, you will find that more difficult than you expect. I have not come to take you anywhere. I have come to tell you the truth. Against every instinct, Seraphine stepped aside. Thessaly entered, settled into the offered chair, declined tea, accepted water, and spoke with the flat precision of a military report. The king did not ignore you by choice. 5 words, and they detonated in Seraphine's chest. For the past 6 years, Kale has been under the influence of a compound called silverthorn. It is derived from a rare fungus that grows in the western reaches, Corsivan territory. Administered in small, consistent doses over time, it does not poison the body. It poisons the bond. It suppresses the alpha's ability to sense, recognize, or respond to his true mate. She becomes background noise. Background noise. All those years of being looked through, not because he had stopped caring, but because someone had chemically severed his ability to feel the bond. Lord Corsivan began dosing the king's wine during the Northern Wars, before the claiming bite even happened, but the bond was strong enough to override the suppression for the first 2 years. That is why Kale still came to you, still claimed you. As the doses accumulated, the connection dimmed. By the time the wars ended and the Silverthorn reached full concentration, you had become invisible to his instincts. And Helene? Initially a pawn, her father positioned her once the bond was sufficiently suppressed. But Helene became an active participant. She managed the dosing personally for the last 14 months, adding a secondary compound that amplified the alpha's instability and paranoia. Seraphine closed her eyes. The room was spinning. The silence had crept in like frost, so gradual that she had blamed herself, had questioned her own worth, had lain awake wondering what flaw in her character had made the man she loved stop seeing her, and it had never been her at all. 8 months ago, the king collapsed during a council session. Seizures. His wolf was fighting the suppression with increasing violence. The court physician found Silverthorn in his blood. When the compound was flushed from his system, the bond returned. All of it. Every suppressed emotion, every dampened instinct, they came flooding back at once. Thessaly paused. He destroyed his chambers, shifted and ran into the thornwood for 3 days. The first word he spoke when he returned was your name. Tears streamed down Seraphine's face, but her voice was controlled. He ignored me for 4 years. Drugged or not, I lived through those years. I carried his child alone. I gave birth alone. I built a life from nothing. I know, Thessaly said quietly. Knowing it was not his fault does not make it hurt less. I know that too. The Corsovans, Seraphine said slowly. They know you are looking for me. Thessaly's expression hardened. Lord Corsovan died of his illness 3 months past. Without his political cunning to restrain her, Helene has become unpredictable. She was arrested when the Silverthorn was discovered, but she escaped custody 6 weeks ago with help from loyalists within her father's old guard. Since then, she has dispatched human mercenaries, hunters who specialize in tracking and eliminating targets the packs cannot officially pursue. We intercepted communication suggesting they know you fled north. How close are they? Before Thessaly could answer, the wolf tracks outside made sudden, terrible sense. Those had not been Thessaly's scouts. They had been Helene's. A child's scream pierced the afternoon. Not Corvin, but a village child, somewhere near the square. Then another. Then the deep, resonant blast of Brindhallow's warning horn, a sound Seraphine had never heard used in 2.5 years of living here. Thessaly was on her feet instantly, a blade appearing in each hand. They are here. Seraphine grabbed Corvin and held him tight against her chest. Thessaly kicked open the front door and stepped into the gray afternoon light. Brindhallow was already in chaos. Villagers ran between cottages, dragging children indoors. Near the square, 3 buildings were burning. The smithy, the elders' hall, the grain store. Strategic targets designed to create maximum panic. And moving through the smoke were figures in dark leather, faces obscured, blades drawn, working methodically toward the northern edge of the village, toward Seraphine's cottage. 8, Thessaly counted. Too many for me alone. Run for the tree line. My wolves are stationed in the cave system half a mile up the ridge. Tell them Thessaly sent you. The first attacker reached them before she could finish. Thessaly intercepted with a spinning parry that sent sparks arcing through the smoke, then cut him down with her counterstrike. The second came from the left. She caught his wrist, twisted it until he dropped his blade, and silenced him with a boot to the temple. Go, now! Seraphine ran. Corvin wailed against her neck. The tree line was 100 yards of open ground. An arrow hissed past her ear and embedded itself in a fence post with a meaty thunk. She did not look back. She made the pines and plunged into the forest, branches whipping her face. Behind her, pursuit crashed through the undergrowth. 2 hunters, maybe 3, gaining ground because she was carrying a child and they were not. The first hunter caught her at the base of the ridge. His hand closed around her cloak and yanked backward. Seraphine twisted, slashing with the skinning knife. The blade caught his forearm, but he did not release her. Corvin screamed, not the wail of a frightened child, but something deeper, something that resonated with a frequency that made the trees around them groan, and Seraphine felt something inside herself crack open. Not break, not shatter. Crack open, the way a seed cracks when the pressure of what is growing inside it finally exceeds the strength of its shell. The healing gift she had carried since childhood, quiet, gentle, a candle flame, had always been a small thing. What surged through her now was a wildfire. Golden light erupted from her hands, her arms, her chest. The hunter shrieked and released her, recoiling as though the light had scalded him to the bone. The second hunter fired his crossbow. The bolt struck the light and disintegrated, consumed before it traveled 6 inches past the boundary of her radiance. Seraphine stood in the forest with her son clutched to her chest and power blazing from her body, and she felt no fear at all. Only a calm, crystalline certainty that she would die before she let anything touch her child. "Leave," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that vibrated in the marrow of every living thing within 100 yards. "Or I will make you wish you had." They fled, every one of them. Then the light guttered, and her legs buckled, and she sank to her knees in the pine needles with Corvin still screaming against her neck. She had nothing left. The power had emptied her completely. If the hunters came back now, she would not be able to lift a finger. But what came instead was a sound that shook the mountain. A howl. Deep, resonant, and saturated with such authority that every wolf within 10 miles would have felt it in their bones. It came from the east, and it was getting closer with terrifying speed. Her mark burned, and through the exhaustion, she felt something she had not felt in 6 years. Not anguish, not searching. Recognition. He had found her. The wolf that burst from the tree line was enormous. Black fur that swallowed the fading light. Shoulders as high as her chest. Eyes. Those eyes she saw every day in her son's face, blazing with golden fire. He crossed the clearing in 3 bounds and skidded to a halt before her. For a suspended moment, he simply stared. His nostrils flared, drinking in her scent. His eyes moved from her face to the child in her arms. The shift was violent, wrenching, agonized, his wolf fighting to stay in protective form while his human mind reached for hands that could touch her face. Then Cale Draven was kneeling in the snow before her, shaking and utterly undone. He was not the man she remembered. The powerful frame had been stripped to sinew and desperation. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath his eyes. His cheekbones stood out like blades beneath sallow skin. But his eyes burned with an intensity that bordered on derangement, every emotion he had been denied for years blazing through them at once. Seraphine, he breathed. Just her name. But the way it left his mouth, fractured, reverent, as though speaking it aloud might prove she was a hallucination, reached past every defense she had built in 2.5 years of exile and pulled them down like curtains. Corvin whimpered against her neck. Cale's gaze dropped to the child, the dark hair, the small face. And when Corvin turned his head and those amber eyes blinked up at the stranger kneeling before them, Cale made a sound that bypassed language entirely. A keen, low and primal, dragged from somewhere so deep it had no words. His hand reached toward his son, trembling, then stopped, hovering inches away as though he did not believe he had the right. "His name is Corvin," Seraphine heard herself say. "He is 22 months old." She watched him do the math, watched the understanding land like a blow, watched his face crumble as he realized his son had been alive for nearly 2 years and he had not known. Had not been there for the birth, the first breath, the first cry, the first word. "Don't." The word came out armored in years of scar tissue. She struggled to her feet, clutching Corvin, putting distance between them. "Don't you dare kneel before me and say you are sorry." "Thessaly told you," he said, rising slowly. "She told me you were drugged, that the Korsavins poisoned our bond. And I believe her. Her voice cracked. But knowing you were a victim does not undo what I lived through, Kyle. I know. Do you? She stepped toward him, and years of swallowed fury finally found its voice. Do you know what it is like to stand 3 feet from the man who claimed you and watch him look through you like you are made of glass? To bring him tea and have him take the cup without touching your fingers? To pass him in a corridor and see absolutely nothing in his eyes? Not cruelty, not contempt, just nothing, as though you had never existed? Cale flinched with each sentence as though she were striking him. Do you know what it is like to carry a child alone? To labor for 16 hours with no one holding your hand except a village midwife who does not know your real name? To watch your son take his first steps and have no one to tell? To see his father's eyes in his face every morning and feel your heart splinter fresh every single time? 4 years I waited for you. She was shouting now, tears streaming, Corvin crying against her chest. I made excuses. I told myself you would come back, that the man who bit this mark into my neck would remember I existed. And you never did. You never came. Not once. I was poisoned. I know you were poisoned. That is not the point. Her voice broke completely. The point is that I lived it, Cale. Every second. The doubt. The shame. The nights I lay awake wondering what was wrong with me. Whether I was too plain, too common, too insignificant to hold the attention of a king. I tore myself apart trying to understand why you stopped loving me, and the answer does not put me back together. It just means I was destroyed for no reason at all. Silence fell between them. Cale stood before her with tears carving tracks through the dirt on his face, making no move to defend himself. You are right, he said quietly. Every word. The Silverthorn stole my bond, but not yours. You felt everything while I floated in a chemical fog, too numb to realize I was losing the most important person in my existence. He took a step toward her. She did not retreat. I cannot give you back those years. I cannot undo the birth I missed, or the first steps, or the first word. But the moment that poison left my body, the first thing I felt was you. Not the kingdom, not the throne. You. Your heartbeat in my chest. Your absence, like a hole torn through the center of my soul. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I have not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since the night I woke up, and you were gone. My wolf has been tearing me apart from the inside, punishing me for failing to protect you. I have burned through every resource, every alliance to find you. Not because I want you back. He paused. Because without you, I am not anything at all. Corvin stopped crying. In the sudden quiet, he turned in Seraphine's arms and looked at Cale with solemn curiosity. Then, with the devastating simplicity of a child who does not understand poison or heartbreak, he reached out his small hand toward his father. Cale pressed his forehead against his son's tiny palm and wept, silently, completely, with the absolute surrender of a man who had finally been given permission to fall apart. Seraphine watched the Alpha King of Arendor come undone at the touch of a child's hand and felt the last wall around her heart crack from foundation to rooftop. She did not forgive him. Not yet. Forgiveness was a journey, not a moment, and they had miles to walk. But she laid her hand on the back of his head, her fingers threading through his dark hair, and let him weep. It was not absolution, but it was a beginning. Thessaly found them 20 minutes later, blood-streaked and limping, with 4 wolves flanking her in shifted form. Village secured, 6 hunters dead, 2 escaped south. Villagers, 3 wounded, none fatal. But her expression held no relief. She withdrew a folded parchment from inside her armor. From Ashenmere. Cale read the message. Seraphine watched exhaustion drain from his face, replaced by something cold and lethal. He handed her the parchment. My king. Helene Korsavin returned to Ashenmere 3 days past with 200 Western soldiers. She presented forged regency documents and demanded entry. Commander Varric refused. She struck him down on the gatehouse steps and took the castle by force. The household guard has been disarmed and confined. Helene has declared herself regent queen, claiming you have gone feral. She holds the castle, the treasury, and 23 hostages, including the High Elder and the children of 4 noble houses. If you do not renounce your claim by the new moon, 3 days hence, the hostages will be put to death publicly as traitors. Whatever Helene is planning, she does not intend to negotiate. She intends to rule. Brennick, steward of Ashenmere. She took the castle, Seraphine said numbly. She took everything. The treasury funds her army. The hostages prevent me from attacking. The forged documents give her just enough legal cover to rally undecided houses. The children, Seraphine said. She is using children as shields. My king, Thessaly interjected. We have perhaps 200 loyal wolves within a day's march. Helene has 200 soldiers entrenched. A direct assault risks the hostages. And doing nothing guarantees their deaths in 3 days, Kale finished. Seraphine looked at her son, sleeping against her shoulder. She looked at the man beside her. She looked at the message in her hands. We ride to Ashenmere, she said. Seraphine, you cannot. She is doing this because of me, because I exist, and she cannot rule while I do. If I hide while those children die, I am no better than she is. She met his eyes. Helene will never stop. She will send more hunters, burn more villages. The only way through this is forward. I am not running anymore. Kale studied her face for a long moment. She watched the war behind his eyes. The alpha who needed to protect his mate fighting the king who recognized she was right. Together, he said. The word carried the weight of a blood oath. You do not leave my side. Together, Seraphine agreed. They rode before the hour was out. Ashenmere looked wrong from the ridge above the capital. The Draven banners were gone, replaced by the silver serpent of House Korsavin. Armed soldiers patrolled the walls. The great gates were barred with iron and guarded by crossbowmen. Siege would take weeks, Thessaly assessed. We do not have weeks. Then we do not siege, Seraphine said quietly. I know that castle better than Helene ever will. I spent years walking its corridors, its passages, every hidden tunnel and forgotten entrance, including one that opens directly into the Great Hall. You are not going in alone, Kale said. Helene expects you. She has built her defense around the assumption that you will come through the front gate with an army. She is not expecting me. Seraphine held his gaze. Let me reach the hostages through the servants' tunnel. When your wolves breach the gates, I shield the innocents. Trust me, she said. The way we should have trusted each other from the beginning. His hand covered hers. Through the bond, she felt his terror. Not for himself, but for her. If anything happens to you, then you will feel it through the bond, and you will come for me. He stepped back. And he let her go. The servants' tunnel was exactly where she remembered, hidden behind a collapsed woodshed 200 yards from the eastern wall, its entrance concealed by decades of overgrown bramble. She crawled through the darkness on hands and knees, the stone pressing close above her, the air thick with dust, and the ghosts of a life she had left behind. Her elbows scraped against the tunnel floor. Cobwebs caught in her hair. But her hands knew the way. Left at the cistern junction, right at the collapsed archway, straight through the passage behind the old wine cellar. She emerged behind the eastern colonnade, just as the first light of dawn crept through the stained glass windows of the great hall. And what she saw made her blood run cold. 23 hostages knelt in a line before the dais, bound at the wrists with iron chains. Guards stood behind them, not the disciplined soldiers she had expected, but nervous men with shifting eyes, their loyalty bought with Corsican gold and held together by fear. At the center of the line, an elderly woman with steel-gray hair and a bruised face knelt with quiet dignity. Marin, the castle's head housekeeper, who had given Seraphine her position in the herb stores 6 years ago, who had turned a blind eye when a young healer disappeared for hours at a time, who had once pressed chamomile tea into Seraphine's hands on a night when the silence from the king had been particularly crushing and said, "Patience, child. Kings are slow, but they are not always stupid." And on Kale's throne, the seat carved from ancient oak that had held every alpha king of Arendor for 9 generations, sat Helene Corsevin, silver blonde hair coiled in an elaborate crown of braids, midnight blue gown trimmed with the silver serpent of her house, ice blue eyes sweeping the hall with the proprietary satisfaction of a woman who had finally taken what she believed she deserved. "The hour approaches," Helene announced to the hall. "The false king has until noon to surrender. If he does not—" She gestured lazily toward the hostages. "Arendor will learn the cost of misplaced loyalty." Seraphine flattened herself against the colonnade and closed her eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of Corvin, safe with Thessaly's wolves on the ridge above the city. She thought of Marin, kneeling in chains for the crime of kindness. She thought of the children in that line, 4 of them, the youngest no older than her own son. She opened her eyes and stepped out from behind the colonnade. "Helene." Her voice carried across the great hall with a clarity that silenced every murmur. Every head turned. Every guard's hand flew to a weapon. Helene's composure cracked for one satisfying instant before reforming into contemptuous amusement. "The servant girl! How delightfully persistent you are! I sent 8 hunters to kill you. Clearly, I should have sent 16. You could have sent 100. It would not have changed anything." Seraphine walked slowly toward the dais, holding Helene's gaze with each step. "I am offering you a trade, me for them. The king's true mate and his heir's mother. The only person in this kingdom whose existence threatens your claim. Release the hostages, and I will surrender myself to you willingly." Helene's eyes narrowed. The calculation was visible. The political value of holding Seraphine versus the liability of maintaining 24 prisoners who required feeding, guarding, and justifying to the increasingly uneasy Western generals. "And why would you do that?" Helene asked slowly. "Because their lives matter more than my safety. Because I will not hide behind innocent people while a tyrant plays queen." Seraphine held her gaze without blinking. "And because you and I both know that this was never about the throne. It was about him. It was always about him." Something ugly flickered behind Helene's ice blue eyes. Recognition. Jealousy. And beneath it, a hatred so deep it had curdled into something almost religious. "Take her," Helene ordered. "Release the others. She is the only hostage I need." Marin caught Seraphine's eye as the old woman was unchained, her aged face twisting with anguish. "Foolish girl," she whispered fiercely. "Brave, beautiful, foolish girl." "Get them out," Seraphine said quietly. "Through the western corridor. Kale's wolves will be at the gates within minutes." Marin's eyes widened with understanding. She began herding the released hostages toward the exit, her voice carrying the sharp authority of a woman who had managed a castle for 30 years and was not about to stop now. The doors closed behind the last prisoner, and Seraphine was alone with Helene and 12 guards. Helene descended from the throne and circled Seraphine with predatory leisure. "Do you know what Silverthorn does when administered to the mate herself?" She withdrew a crystal vial filled with dark liquid. "This variant does not suppress the bond. It severs it. Permanently. Irreversibly. 1 dose, and the king will never feel you again." She held the vial up to the light. "After this, the great love story simply evaporates. You are insane, Seraphine said. Hold her, Helene ordered. Rough hands seized Seraphine's arms. Helene approached, unstoppering the vial with a delicate twist. And inside Seraphine, something answered. Not the healing gift. Something older. Something that had been sleeping in her blood since the night Kale's teeth had claimed her. The Alpha's power carried in the scar tissue, rewriting her blood for 6 years, waiting for the moment when the need was absolute and the resistance was finally gone. The wolf. She had never shifted, had never even felt the possibility of it. Common-born wolves rarely develop the ability. But the claiming bite of a true mate was not an ordinary mark. It carried the Alpha's power in its scar tissue. It rewrote the recipient's blood with the potential of the one who had given it. And Seraphine's blood had been rewriting itself for 6 years, slowly, silently, building toward this moment. The shift erupted, volcanic, unstoppable. Her spine bowed, her bones reformed, muscles tore and rebuilt. The guards holding her were flung backward as her body expanded, reshaped, became something new. The vial slipped from Helene's fingers and shattered on the stone floor. Dark liquid pooled between the fragments, useless and wasted. Where Seraphine had stood, a wolf now rose, fur the color of burnished copper, shot through with veins of gold that pulsed with healing light. Her eyes blazed amber, a true mate's shift, the rarest transformation in wolf kind, born not from bloodline or training, but from the sheer force of a bond that refuses to die. The guards dropped their weapons and fled through every available exit, their training and professionalism dissolving in the face of something their contracts had not prepared them for. Helene did not run. She drew a wolfsbane-etched silver dagger from her bodice, the same poison that had fueled her family's entire conspiracy, and held it before her with both hands. You are nothing, she hissed, her poise dissolving into jagged, ugly fury. A servant, a nobody. You do not deserve any of it. Seraphine shifted back to human form. She stood before her enemy, trembling with the aftershock of transformation. I was never nothing. I was the woman he chose before your father ever poured the first drop of poison. I was the woman whose bond survived 6 years of chemical warfare. And I am the woman who just walked into your stolen castle, freed your hostages, and shattered your last weapon on the floor. She stepped forward, and in about 4 seconds, my mate is going to come through that wall. The wall exploded inward. Kale's wolf form crashed through the masonry with the force of an avalanche. Behind him poured a tide of wolves, Thessaly's trackers, the king's guard, wolves from every province who had answered their king's call. Helene dropped the dagger. It rang against the stone like a bell tolling the end of something. Kale shifted to human form, crossed the hall, and grabbed Helene by the collar, lifting her off her feet with one hand. You poisoned me. You stole my mate. You stole 2 years of my son's life. You seized my castle and threatened my people. His voice was barely a whisper and more terrifying for it. Give me one reason. Because she would not want you to, Seraphine said from behind him. His wild golden eyes found hers. Not like this. Not in anger. She faces trial. She faces judgment. That is how a king handles this. That is how we handle this. For a terrible moment his grip held. Then, slowly, his fingers opened. Helene stumbled back, catching herself against the dais. Chain her, Kale ordered hoarsely. Every crime, every dose, every life she has endangered. He turned and walked to Seraphine. His hands cupped her face. You shifted. I did. You are magnificent. I know. Despite everything, the battle, the blood, the years of poison and silence. Kyle laughed. And Seraphine, standing in the ruins of a stolen throne room with wolf fur still prickling beneath her skin, laughed with him. The trial lasted 3 days. Helene was brought before the assembled packs of Arendor in the same great hall, where she had sat upon a stolen throne. The evidence was overwhelming. Vials of silverthorn recovered from her chambers, testimony from the court physician who had identified the compound, letters in Lord Corsivin's hand detailing the dosing schedule, and the sworn accounts of servants who had witnessed Helene personally administering the poison to the king's wine. Helene denied nothing. She stood before the tribunal with her chin raised and her ice-blue eyes burning with unrepentant fury, and declared that everything she had done was justified because Seraphine was unworthy of the throne. The Pax disagreed. The sentence was exile to the Ashward Barrens, the desolate volcanic waste beyond the southern mountains where nothing grew and no pack claimed territory. Her wolf was not stripped, as some had demanded, but the isolation would amount to the same thing. A wolf without a pack was a wolf without purpose, and a Corsivan without power was nothing at all. The Western generals who had supported the coup surrendered without resistance once Helene was convicted. Their soldiers, many of whom had been conscripted under threat, were pardoned on condition of renewed loyalty oaths. The Corsivan holdings were dissolved, their territories redistributed among the lesser houses who had remained loyal during the crisis. Arendor exhaled. Slowly, cautiously, the kingdom began to breathe again. Seraphine found the transition from fugitive to queen considerably less smooth than the storybooks suggested. There were days when the sheer weight of what was expected of her, the meetings, the protocols, the endless parade of courtiers seeking audiences, left her gasping for air. She had spent 6 years as a healer, more than 2 of them under a false name in a mountain village. She was not trained for thrones, but she was trained for people, for listening to pain and finding the remedy that fit, for sitting at a bedside through the long hours when a fever would not relent and hope was running thin, for looking someone in the eyes and saying, "I see you, I hear you, you matter." And it turned out that was exactly what a wounded kingdom needed. She kept her healing practice, not in the lower castle, but in the royal wing, where anyone could seek treatment. The courtiers were scandalized, the commoners were stunned, the children of the castle adored her. Corvin adapted with the terrifying ease of a child who does not understand social hierarchy. He chased kitchen cats through the banquet hall. He pulled the High Elder's ceremonial beard. He fell asleep in his father's lap during a trade negotiation, and Cale conducted the remaining 2 hours with one hand on his son's back and an expression of such fierce, quiet contentment that the Eastern ambassadors agreed to terms they would never have accepted from intimidation alone. The bond completion ceremony was held on the first night of summer, in the Thornwood where it had all begun. No great hall, no noble witnesses. Just Seraphine and Cale beneath the oaks, with Thessaly's wolves at the forest's edge and Corvin asleep in a cradle of bundled cloaks, snoring softly. "I should have done this years ago," Cale said. "This time I am not just yours," Seraphine answered. "You are mine, equally, completely. Not as a king claiming a commoner, but as my mate recognizing his equal." He bared his throat, the ancient gesture of absolute vulnerability. Seraphine pressed her lips to the curve of his neck, felt his pulse thundering beneath her mouth. She bit down, the bond sealed with a force that drove them both to their knees. Not pain, completion. 2 halves of a single soul becoming whole. She was inside his mind and he was inside hers, and for one transcendent moment, the boundaries between them dissolved. She felt his years of drugged numbness, not absence of feeling, but feeling trapped behind glass, screaming without sound. The horror of waking and realizing what he had lost, running through the thornwood at night, howling her name into indifferent darkness, and he felt hers. The slow erosion of hope. The birth of their son, alone, terrified, gripping the midwife's hand. The first time Corvin opened his amber eyes and she saw Kale looking back at her from a face that would never know its father. The mornings she woke and had to choose again to keep living in a world that had quietly, systematically emptied her of everything she had to give. They held each other in the moonlit forest and let the bond show them everything, every wound, every scar. And then it showed them what remained. A kingdom healing, a son growing. A love that had been tested by the worst that human cruelty could devise and had emerged forged into something unbreakable. When Seraphine pulled back, she was crying. But for the first time in 6 years, the tears were not grief. They were relief. My queen, Kale whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. My king, she answered. My mate. My home. In the cradle between them, Corvin stirred, murmured something unintelligible, and reached out one small hand. Kale caught it gently, with the same trembling reverence as the first time, in a snowy forest, when a child's touch had broken him open and rebuilt him in the same breath. Above them, the wolves lifted their voices in a howl that rolled across the thornwood and echoed from the walls of Ashenmere. One by one, wolves across the kingdom answered, from villages and mountain passes, from coastal outposts and ancient forests, until the entire realm hummed with the knowledge that its king and queen were finally, irrevocably, whole. They had not been given a perfect story. They had been given a broken one and had chosen, every single day, to keep holding the pieces until they found a way to make them fit again. And in the end, that was worth more than perfection ever could have been. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.